Hi, this is Joe Chambers. Welcome to Musicians Hall of Fame Backstage, the Vault Series. Today's guest is Shelby Singleton. This is part 2 of a 2-part interview we did with Shelby back in 2004 at his recording studio here in Nashville. Shelby had a huge career in music, buying Sun records from Sam Phillips, as well as founding his own recording company and record label, Plantation Records. Hope you enjoy it. If you do, be sure to hit like, subscribe, and the notification bell so you don't miss any of our new content. And for those of you who can afford, we now have a Patreon account as well. Again, hope you enjoy Shelby Singleton. When did you actually start your own record label again?
1968.
In what year did Harper Valley come out?
68.
68. 68 was a good year.
Next year was better because 1969 is when I bought Sun Records.
And how did that happen?
I had known Sam Phillips for many years because I used to go to Memphis doing promotion all the time, and used to go over to the studio and hang out with him all night long while he was working on something or they were recording or whatever. And he called me one day and said that KEMMONS Wilson wanted to buy me out. And I told him I wasn't for sale. And he said, well, come over here and talk to KEMMONS. KEMMONS had Holiday Inn Records at that time. And he had this weird idea that he had this female disc jockey named Dottie Holliday who had all-night shows on 50 all-night stations and played nothing but good music. And he was going to make records and they were going to sell them at all the Holiday Inns. And so I went over to talk to KEMMONS and I told him that ain't going to work. Well, how you know it won't work? I said, well, it just won't work. So I said, what you should do is you should buy Sun from Sam and put out Sun Records and, you know, put it out into the regular market. He said, no, them old records ain't no good. Ain't nobody gonna want them. They're gonna want new stuff. And I said, well, okay, I'll buy Sun. And Sam said, well, I'll sell it to you. And I said, well, what do you want for it? So he gave me a figure, and I said, well, I'll give you such and such. And we argued for a while, and finally we came to an agreement on a price. And so I said, okay, Sam, I'll go back to Nashville, and I'll get the attorneys to draw up the papers and everything. So I did, and...
Now, did I read that it was $1 million is what you paid for it?
That's not true. But anyway, I've never told him about what I paid for it. Everybody speculates. But anyway, it took 6 months from the time of that meeting until I actually got Sam over here to sign the papers. And I thought he was going to back out at the last minute, you know. It was like he was selling one of his children. But he hadn't really done anything with it since 1961, I don't think. He got disgusted with the record business and got more involved in radio and his other things that he was doing and just didn't pay attention to the record business. So I bought it the year that Cash had his TV show, the Summer Replacement thing. And I guess the people used to say before the ink was dry on the papers, I had 4 albums by Cash in the charts. So I put out like 4, just bang, bang, bang on top of each other.
Now, is that because the TV show came out?
Yeah.
Now, and the stuff he did on Sun was is the classic Cash stuff, though, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Well, we've got a total of 60 sides on him, and we've got I think 244 on Jerry Lee Lewis. But, you know, it's just a timeless thing. And like you was talking earlier about, you know, when 8-tracks came and then cassettes came and then CDs came, the technology changes as now the downloading will be the next thing. You know, the 99-cent downloads.
What do you think of that?
I think it's going to put a lot of record stores out of business. I think that's going to be the future of what's going to happen.
When you bought Sun from Sam, you had already built a studio here.
Yes.
And So you just took over distribution of all the things that had been pre-recorded, or did you ever add any other?
Added a lot of stuff to it in later years, but basically I sent a U-Haul truck kind of like the one you had here today over there, and 2 people to catalog everything. It was over in the tape vault, and he had all the Cream stuff, the Johnny Cash and Jerry Lee Lewis and Carl Perkins and Roy Orbison stuff was very organized. And then he had one whole wall marked Hillbilly and another one marked R&B. And they'd been over there about 2 weeks working on cataloging that stuff, and I said, put all that stuff in a truck and bring it over here. So they did, and Sam liked to have a fit. You know, what if they'd have had a wreck? I said, well, they'd have had a wreck, you know, but he was afraid the tapes would get destroyed. But anyway, we ended up with all the tapes, you know.
Did he ever regret selling it to you?
I'm sure he did, but I don't think we'll ever know that. He died. He and I stayed friends all these years.
Getting back to the musicians that were here, what group did you find predominant when you got here that you thought were being overly used on a lot of the records, perhaps? Not putting them down, just saying that there was just a certain...
Well, the same records were always had Floyd Cramer, Bob Moore, Harold Bradley, either Hank Garland or Grady Martin, and the background singers were always either the Jordanaires or the Nita Kerr singers. I mean, that was the only choices that you really had until I started bringing other musicians in to mix with that, mix up those groups.
So that would be your original A-team, Nashville
Right.
A-team. And then so later you're looking at, Charlie McCoy, did you use Charlie?
I used Charlie, but that was after that. He wasn't here during the early '60s.
Who would one of your sessions say be comprised of? Pig?
Either Pig, or sometimes I'd use Marvin Hughes. Sometimes I'd use Buddy Killen on bass. I'd use Jerry Kerrigan or Willie Ackerman on drums. I would use sometimes Joe Zinkin on bass. Sometimes Roy Huskey on bass. I'd use Jerry Kendi on guitar. I always used Harold Bradley for some reason. I always liked Harold. He was always easy to work with. He was always very inventive, and he played probably 90% of the sessions that I did. And you know, I'd use Grady Martin sometimes. Sometimes I'd use Hank Garland, but they were mixed in with all these other strange musicians.
What about Steele?
I used to bring a guy in from Shreveport named Sonny TRAMMELL to play steel on most of the stuff back then. That was before Pete Drake was here. Or
Pete's from Atlanta too, though, isn't he?
Yeah, down that area.
And you actually used Jerry Reed a lot?
Used him a lot on guitar. Used Ray Stevens a lot on piano. Just depended on what record I was cutting and who was available at that time. But I used to use Floyd Cramer sometimes. And I'd use all the A-team musicians, but
not all the time.
Not all together.
Are there musicians outside of Nashville that you've always thought were excellent musicians? Maybe even if you didn't use them, that you knew played on a lot of records.
Yeah, when I used to do some recording in California, I used to use Hal Blaine on drums, use Glen Campbell on guitar. I used to record a lot in New Orleans. I used to use Alan Toussaint on keyboards there.
He did I think, didn't he do something with Paul McCartney there too? Didn't he? I think he did Venus and Mars album for Paul McCartney.
He may have, but you know, he was a writer and a producer and everything. He used, Alan was partners with a guy named Marshall Seahorn in the Sea Saint Studios. And he wrote Southern Nights and Whipped Cream and Mother-in-Law and a lot of those type of hits, you know.
Who did you record in California?
Used to record Patti Page out there.
What studio did you use?
Radio recorders.
Did you use any other studios out there ever?
I probably did, but I don't remember them. That was the one, first time I met Elvis was in that studio.
When was that?
Oh, probably 60 or 61, somewhere around then.
You know, I didn't finish on the Beatles thing either. Did you ever meet George or Ringo?
I met Ringo, but I never met George Harrison. No.
Did you meet Ringo when he was here recording with Pete, maybe, or?
No, I went down to Huntsville one time. Randy Bachman was down there playing a tour, and
Bachman Turner Overdrive, or guess who?
yeah, Bachman Turner Overdrive. And I was backstage and met Ringo and his wife backstage then, and he didn't remember me from England, but I remembered him, you know, type of thing.
What'd you do with was Bachman Turner on Mercury Records?
They were at one time, but basically I had bought, when Complete Records went bankrupt, I bought all their, I bought a lot of their masters, and I bought the Bachman Turner Overdrive stuff in that bankruptcy. And since that time, I've become friends with Randy.
Did you ever get a movie out of Harper Valley? Wasn't there a movie, a TV movie or something on that?
We made a theatrical movie, and we had a TV series. The theatrical movie starred Barbara Eden, and it cost about $1.2 million to shoot it. And
Would that have been shortly after the record had been out?
no, it was 10 years later.
Wow.
It took us that long to get the movie done. But we found a guy who up in Cincinnati who owned or controlled about 300 theaters, and we got him to make it. And of course, he had a built-in play place.
Right.
But it became very successful. I don't know what it grossed, somewhere around 30, 40, 50 million.
Really? Wow. And did you own the book or the?
We owned the rights to it. Yeah. I don't know why, but when Harper Valley became a hit, I went to Jimmy Key and bought the rights from him for the movie. Or I bought the movie rights for the song, and just had an idea that, okay, it'll make a movie one day, you know.
That was good thinking.
Yeah, so it did. And the TV series, for some reason or another, the lawyers screwed up and we didn't have control. If we'd had control, the TV series would probably still be on the air today, but we didn't have control and they just butchered it. It didn't really come off like it should have been. It could have been a continuing story forever.
What's some of your favorite producers?
Oh, I'd have to think about that as like probably Jerry Kennedy would be my #1 favorite. And then after that, people like Rick Hall, always respected what Rick did. In California, I would say, I don't know, I think Art LaBeau never got a lot of credit for things he did. I used to love Snuffy Garrett, what Snuffy did. There was a guy in England named Jack Baverstock that was very good.
Billy Sherrill?
Yeah, Billy was always too talented for me.
What do you mean?
Well, he could hear a pin drop, you know, and he could tell if something was wrong and everything. See, I'm not a musician. I can't tell whether somebody's sharp, flat, or crooked. So I look at a record more for what the people are going to buy, and I think Billy looks at records musically, and he's a great musician. So, and like Chet Atkins was a great musician. So, and Owen Bradley, but they look at records entirely different than what I do. It's the first, whenever I start to create a record or a song, I guess the first thing I got to think of is, can I get this on the radio? Will they play this? And that's what I would shoot for, to try to make a sound that they would be played. You know, Billy Sherrill tells that story about George Jones, and he stopped loving her today.
Right. Well, George, it took him a year, maybe a year and a half to get it completed.
Put his voice on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but George might tell it the other way. You know, he found it took him a year and a half for Billy to let him cut it. You know?
Yeah. Actually, he told Billy it was most morbid thing he'd ever heard, and they'll never play it, was the story I heard anyway.
I cut a lot of sessions on George whenever I was with Mercury too, and I don't think I ever cut a record with him that he liked.
Did you cut what did you cut on George? You didn't cut White Lightning, did you?
No, that was cut by Pappy Daly. That was cut down in Houston. But Achy Breaky Heart I cut. I forget all of them. I did some album a tribute to Hank Williams. And during those years, some years I would cut as high as 300 sessions in a year. I'd be cutting 3 a day at times here in Nashville. And then besides all the time I spent in New York and in Europe and LA and other places.
How did you have time to do that?
I had some good assistants. I had Ray Stevens, I had Jerry Reed, and I had Jerry Kennedy. And they used to rehearse the acts, get them prepared, and then we just run them in the studio, and they would do the records. And I was a sorter. I'd say, okay, I like this, I don't like that, do this, and change that, you know, type of thing.
So you had this talent that you didn't even know you had until they put you in a situation.
No, it was a big accident, you know.
Speaking of Chet, what did you think of Chet?
He was a great human being and probably one of the most talented guitar players I ever was around. I mean, Jerry Kennedy is a talented guitar player, but you know, Chet style-wise was just so stylish, and he was really a gentleman too.
Mm-hmm. He helped a lot of people get become famous. I mean,
I'm sure. You know, he used to say that he didn't make them become famous; he made them become notorious.
Well, gee, we covered a lot of ground in a short period of time.
Well, next time you come back, we'll do more.
I'd love to.
Okay.
All right.